So how has my first game performed after 6 months on Steam? Let's get into it. The game was free, so I made $0. There were 48 wish lists, 97 users downloaded and launched the game, and there were 3 reviews. So $0 were made, there were hardly any wish lists, there was very few downloads, and there was only 3 reviews. Is the game a failure? Granted, if you were measuring the game on the aforementioned metrics, then yes, the game is a failure. If I relied on income from my games, then the game would be a catastrophic failure. However, I don't rely on the income, and personally I don't think the game was a failure, and that is because I started the game with 2 very specific project objectives. So I wanted 2 things out of this project. Firstly, I wanted to learn how to use Godot. And secondly, I wanted to learn how to distribute a game on Steam. When I'm learning to create games with a new language or framework, I always code asteroids. I do so because it's a simple but useful introduction to game development. And not surprisingly, coding asteroids did the job here too. As for Steam, that was a complete unknown for me in terms of game development. So I wanted to clear that hurdle sooner rather than later. And again, because I chose a simple game that took very little time to build, I was able to get to the distribution point fairly quickly. So my first game, albeit a clone of asteroids that got lost in the great void, which is Steam, it did help me learn the basics of Godot, and it did guide me through the Steam distribution process. Thus, from my perspective, the game was a success. Of course, not everyone agrees. I did receive criticism, which mostly followed the complaint,
"It's just a clone of asteroids."
And that is true. I did produce a clone. Space Rock Armageddon is effectively a clone of an arcade classic. It was easy to produce, and I will need to produce something better if I want to make this indie game thing work. But I wanted to start small, and I knew that starting small would come with criticism. It did, and I'm happy to take that criticism on the chin. Going forward, I'll need to produce something better than a clone, and I think we can all agree on that point. I also have my own criticism. The code, as we say in this part of the world, is a big bag of mince. In other words, the code is a mess. And to be honest, whilst I'm critical of my code, which is a normal thing for a developer to do, I'm also kind of okay with the code being a mess, because sometimes you have to leave bad code alone so that you can get the project over the line. And yes, that is a controversial point that I don't always agree with. However, for a bigger project, I'll need better coding solutions. Therefore, my next game needs a cleaner and better organized code base. Another criticism of mine is that I should have spent more time on the Steam page. I was really quite surprised how much art was required for the aforementioned. And I'm not going to lie, I rushed through the art and the setting up of the Steam page so I could get to the distribution point. That was a mistake. The Steam page is an important part of the process, obviously, and it deserved more attention. I won't make the same mistake for my next game. And who knows, I might even go back and update Space Rock Armageddon's Steam page. Another criticism of mine is I completely failed to understand the importance of wish lists. I understood wish lists from the perspective of a gamer. You see a game you want to buy, you wishlist it, and then you're notified when it's released. However, I didn't really understand the importance of wish lists from the developer's perspective. And thus I never really spent any time building Space Rock Armageddon's wish list, which not surprisingly led to very few downloads on day 1 and beyond. And that kind of leads me nicely into lessons learned. I think the biggest lesson learned for me is to pay more attention to the wish list. I went into this project with a specific release date, which is a good thing, but I also think you need a target wish list figure. So for example, let's say you get to your release date, but you haven't met your wishlist target. Then maybe you should hold off on the release until you meet that wishlist target. There's obviously a balance there. You can't hold off forever. But Steam is now an important part of the process, and thus it deserves more attention. The other lesson learned is to spend more energy on promotion. That's an obvious lesson. My problem is that I don't really know how to. So I guess I need to do some learning. And whilst we're talking about promotion, I am working on a new game. There's nothing to show at the moment, but when there is, you'll be the first to know. And that is pretty much it. I have worked in software for quite a long time, and this little game is the piece of software that I'm mostly proud of. And I know that a lot of you are making games too, and most likely feel the same way. You are not defined by your job title. You are defined by your creations. Peace.